our valued core members, affiliated organizations, and all of those folks in the public who are here today to learn more about these stories of arts resilience. So my name is Andrew Leith. I am the Director of Cultural Programs and Museum Practice here at the Chicago Cultural Alliance. I'm very excited again to welcome everybody here today. And I really would like to take a moment to acknowledge that none of this would be possible if not for the incredibly generous support of our dear friends at Illinois Humanities. So we'd like to thank them for supporting this program through the Community Resilience Grant. Again, we're very, very grateful to Illinois Humanities. So a little bit about Stories of Arts Resilience. This is an idea that began of a few of the folks in the Art Corps. So for those people who know Chicago Cultural Alliance, we are really privileged to participate with a group of like-minded organizations, See Chicago Dance and the Arts and Business Council of Chicago. And we have quarterly meetings, and at our quarterly meeting early this year, we were musing about the fact that folks in the arts sector, the humanities sector, the museum sector are hit hard during moments like this. And our experiences are a bit different than those experiences of folks in other sectors. And we were reflecting on the fact that we struggled after 9/11, we struggled with the housing crisis in 2008, and now we're struggling and finding unique ways of persevering in the wake of COVID. And wouldn't it be nice if there was some type of archives of stories and reflections, moments of struggle, moments of inspiration that we can look to in the future as a community, both for strength and inspiration, maybe for moments of levity, and also to feel a sense of camaraderie. So thank you to all of you for being here. I also want to acknowledge a few of the folks we're very privileged to have working with us today. I would like to acknowledge Alicia Zemet. Alicia is our program manager for Stories of Arts Resilience. She is a recent public history graduate who is interested in working in the cultural nonprofit field. Alicia has experience in various museum settings and as a communications and project manager. Alicia, we're so grateful for everything that you've done. We wouldn't be here today if not for you. I'd also like to thank our good friends at StoryCorps, and I'd like to thank Amy Tardif, the regional manager of StoryCorps here in Chicago, for being here with us today. It's really thanks to StoryCorps' amazing resources that we're able to do this. So thank you, Amy, and thank you, StoryCorps. And I'd also like to acknowledge with great amount of enthusiasm, a big thank you to our moderator today, Dr. Ada Cheng. Ada is a professor turned storyteller, solo performer, and storytelling show producer. She is the producer and host of 5 storytelling shows, including Pour One Out, Am I Man Enough, Talk Stories, an Asian American, Asian diaspora storytelling show, Speaking Truths series, and This is America, Truths Through My Body. She has worked with the various member organizations of Chicago Cultural Alliance through her storytelling, including the Chinese American Museum of Chicago, Japanese American Service Committee, and the National Cambodian Heritage Museum. She creates platforms for people to tell difficult and vulnerable stories, as well as spaces for people who may not have had opportunities otherwise. She currently works as the Education and Outreach Specialist with Women's Leadership and Resource Center at UIC, providing training on issues related to gender-based violence. Her interests span multiple fields, including academia, storytelling, performance art, and advocacy. Ada Cheng's motto is, make your life the best story you tell. Thank you so much, Ada. And finally, I also want to acknowledge the Stories of Arts Resilience Steering Committee. I'd like to say this is a committee of volunteers who came together to donate their time and creativity to help to make this a successful project. And this committee is comprised primarily of our core members, community stakeholders, and friends. So I'd like to acknowledge Cairo Dai of the National Hellenic Museum, Amita Banjeri and Padma Rangaswamy from the National Indo-American Museum, Emma Saito Lincoln from the Japanese American Service Committee, Karn Abercrombie from the Swedish American Museum, Gabriela Juarez from the Open Center for the Arts, Nathan Elstrand from Loyola University Chicago, and Macy Larson from the Illinois Holocaust Museum. Thank you all so much for making this project a success. And finally, I'd also like to say to all of you who are here today, if you're inspired by the stories that we listen to and the work that we're doing at Chicago Cultural Alliance, we welcome your support in any form. If you'd like to give today, you're welcome to text CULTURE, C-U-L-T-U-R-E, to 243725, or to donate online, and my colleague Teresita will be making those links available, as you can see on the screen right now. So thank you so much, everyone.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Alicia Zymet. I am the program manager for the Stories of Arts Resilience project. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to talk about the project a little more. I know Andrew introduced it a little bit. And I would also like to say thank you so much to everyone for being here today. We are really excited about this event. So to start off, Stories of Arts Resilience is an oral history project documenting the perspectives of arts and museum professionals in regard to their challenges, accomplishments, and methods of persevering during the COVID-19 crisis. The stories that you will find in the Stories of Arts Resilience archive provide examples of how our community of professionals have experienced not only challenges and adversity, but also resilience. And this brings us to the main theme of this project, the idea of resilience and all the forms that it comes in. So we are lucky to be able to showcase a couple of, just a few of the interviews that were recorded for this project. And you'll see all of the different forms that resilience takes in these interviews. Next, I would just like to speak for a minute or two on the archive themselves that we are creating out of these interviews. We were able over the past 2 months to record 20 interviews with StoryCorps, and we have been so excited about that. And thank you so much to everyone who has made that possible. So today we'll be showcasing 7, but there are 13 more interviews that you can check out in this archive. So this first wave of stories for the Stories of Arts Resilience will be free and open to the public on StoryCorps Archive website. Amy Tardif at StoryCorps will speak more on how you can find that on their website, but it will be available at archive.storycorps.org. Chicago Cultural Alliance will also be having a link to our collection of stories on their website. So you are free to go to Chicago Cultural Alliance website and you'll find the link to those stories there. I say first wave of the Stories of Arts Resilience project because we are hoping to expand this collection of interviews and stories. We envision this archive to grow to include not only stories of resilience during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also stories of resilience within your communities related to other adversities that you may have faced in the past or in the present. So we welcome everyone to continue sharing their stories related to COVID-19, but also any other challenges you may have faced and persevered through. We would love to have all of these stories part of the SOAR archive in the future. So please, I would just like to remind you to check out the rest of the interviews that we have part of our collection. And you can hear more of the wonderful stories that you're about to hear now of these 7 that we were able to feature. And I would also like you to think about the possibility of recording some more stories with us. If you have an interest in it, you're most definitely free to email me, or I believe Andrew Leith would also be happy to take any questions. So we would love to have you part of the project, if at all possible. Okay, I think now I will turn things over to Amy Tardif at StoryCorps.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Let me make sure I'm unmuted. Yes, okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us today, and it's great to see so many people here. I must apologize, they are tuck pointing in my building, so I hope that you can hear me without all the drilling coming through, which I'm sure it is. So first of all, StoryCorps' mission is to preserve and share humanity's stories, to build connections between people and create a more just and compassionate world. We do this by recording 40-minute conversations between two people who matter to each other, and then preserving them at the Library of Congress and in our own online archive. It's said to be the largest collection of human voices ever recorded. And since March, these conversations have been recorded on a new virtual recording platform created especially by StoryCorps' digital team. Last April, we started talking with the Chicago Cultural Alliance about how we could help preserve the stories of people working in the city's cultural institutions and how they're dealing with resilience in 2020. And at the end of October, we began recording what would become 20 pairs of participants from more than 19 organizations. In fact, the 20th pair records tomorrow, actually. Some of those organizations are the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, the Goodman Theater, the Chinese American Museum, the Field Museum, and See Chicago Dance. And that's just a small selection. Though there are many people behind the scenes at StoryCorps, including the archiving department, part-time facilitators who may step in if the Chicago team is not available, our supervisor who's joining us today, the development team, the digital team who created our virtual platform in less than a month, I think, and our researcher who helped me out this morning, who's also here. The bulk of the work was done by the Chicago Story Booth team, which consists of me, Community Engagement Associate and Facilitator Mary Beth Sear, who's here, Community Engagement Associate and Facilitator Rocio Santos, who's here, and our fall intern, Susanna Kemp, who's also here. And though you're about to hear several edited pieces, you can hear, as Alicia said, the full conversations in our online archive by going to archive.storycorps.org and searching the keyword section for Chicago Cultural Alliance. And if you'd like to record your own story, you can of course get in touch with the Chicago Cultural Alliance, but there are also several ways to do it. If you'd like the most formal way with the assistance of a facilitator, like those that were recorded and that you'll hear today, you can book an appointment at storycorps.org/Chicago. And if you'd like to do it yourself, you can use our DIY version called StoryCorps Connect. You don't have to be in the same place or even in the same city as your recording partner for either of those. And you can also use our free app if you're in the same home as your recording partner. And information on both of those are at storycorps.org/participate. Now on with the show.
Should I go ahead? Very good. Andrew, can you do me a favor? Can you put us back to the main screen so I can see everybody? To the gallery view. All right. My name is Ada Jen. I'm a storyteller, solo performer, storytelling show producer. Before I talk about oral history, before I do that, I want to check in with everybody just to see how everyone is doing. Can I have one word how you're feeling right now? You can either answer through chat, or I'm going to welcome you to unmute yourself and to give me that one word how you're feeling. Just yell out, yell. Unmute yourself.
Excited.
Excited.
Amazing.
Amazing. Let me see. Yeah. Cold. Okay, cold. That's a good thing. Fantastic. Excited. Grateful, absolutely. Optimistic,
Intrigued.
so happy. Very good, very good. Keep going, keep going. 2 more feelings. Curious, absolutely. Happy, 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 important. Relieved, wonderful, wonderful. Connected. We haven't started yet. People already feel connected. That's wonderful. Keep going. Hopeful, intrigued, absolutely. Exhausted is also a good one. Ha! Very good. So this is fantastic. I want to make sure that you stay with your feelings. And I want to talk a little bit about what I do. I produce storytelling shows. However, I don't define what I do as simply producing shows for people to tell stories. I see what I do as preserving the oral history, right? The only difference is oral history in action, where people stand in front of an audience and tell stories in public as a form of public performance. And this is not just for artists, performers, but also for community members who may not have performance experiences. It's everyone. And so for me, storytelling shows are my ways to preserve histories about oneself, one's place in the community, but also the collective history of the community. And here's the thing I want to distinguish what we're doing here in terms of the oral history. Oral history is not just important because of the story, it's also important because of the sharing. Think about this, written history, reading books, reading articles, reading stories by itself is a solitary activity. But when you say story, we say share stories. When we share, it's always in relation to another person or 2 more people, 3 people, 5 people, a group. So sharing, it's about a relationship. So this is why this is important in terms of what we do here. It's not just the stories that have been told, but it is the fact that we are in this room, that we are sharing stories with one another. And when we share, that's how we create intimate space for one another. That's how we create a sense of belonging with one another. That's how we create a sense of community. And that's how we create a sense of home. And here's the thing, when we're going to be here an hour and a half, it might be temporary, but what's going to stay with you is the feeling. It's the emotions that we share with one another, not just the facts and data information, but it really is about the sentiments and emotions that we're going to take away with us. So I want you to pay attention to the story, to the emotions, to the feelings. And I want you to remember the first words that you just threw out earlier. And I'll check in with you again at the end of the program and to see how everyone feels and see if we can collectively create a sense of community right here. And this is what we mean by sharing stories. It's about a collective activity. Does that sound good with everybody? Good, give me a sign, thumbs up. Very good, I love it, love it. Thank you so much. So we're going to start we're going to listen into interview. I'm going to introduce people briefly, and we're going to listen to the tape. I need to apologize first if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Andrew and I were trying to fix this problem before the event, so forgive me if I mispronounce your name. And I'm going to introduce the first interview that we're going to hear, which is between Carol Dye and Katie Kalaidis, and their friends and colleagues at the National Hellenic Museum. And this story was facilitated by Mary B. Sear and edited by Susanna Kemp. So Chelsea, go ahead and play the interview.
Sorry, 1 second, guys. My computer's being very slow. Okay.
Crazy.
I, in normal life, am an event manager for the museum, but we're not doing events. We are not open. So my job has become really to be a video producer and a social media manager, both of which I should say are things that I really don't have any background in. It really has been a lot of learning on the fly. I made a lot of jokes about going to YouTube University. June, I kind of pitched this idea of doing a video a week. I do this video series where I read a mythology story for kids, basically. The first time I did it, it took me like 3 full days to do. And my poor roommates watched me have like a full-on nervous breakdown the first 2 videos that we did. But now I've got it down where I can kind of shoot and edit a video basically in a morning. Over time, you learn.
It's hard to find a good thing about something that's, killed so many people and everything. But I think there is a real sort of inner strength that you only build up in moments where you need to call on that.
And I think for me, this whole experience has actually kind of taught me to be a little gentler with myself. We're living in a moment of mass trauma. It's insane to expect that I can be like top productivity in this moment of intense anxiety.
We're a Greek American museum. And so a lot of what we talk about is the resilience of this tradition that we call Hellenism. I'm a Greek American too. I've really tapped into, how do we tell those stories of suffering and resilience from the past? Like, in what ways can the past be an anchor for us? Because when everything first started and I was like stressed, I called my mom crying, and my mother is like me. She does not deal well with human emotion. She said, you stop that right now, Catherine. You come from tougher stuff than that. If you're a human being in the 21st century, like, you come from tougher stuff than that. We do a series called Famous Philhellenes. We look at different people who have been inspired by the Hellenic tradition. And the first person we did was the first African American to receive a scholarship to go to the American school at Athens. We did that in the summer on the back of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. We'd never done anything like that as an institution before. Racial politics and the Greeks are a little messy. I was ready to handle the backlash. And that was our most shared Instagram post ever.
I think that was our maybe first real test of, can we broaden the conversations that we have and maybe take on some things that we as an institution have avoided in the past. When I posted that, you emailed me after it did well, and you said I had had more faith in your community than you had at that moment.
Absolutely. During the pandemic, one of the things I've learned is you have to have faith in people.
I think this experience has given us a bit more grace with each other in some ways. Like Zoom calls with colleagues, we see each other in our home states. Katie and her dog, kids who show up on Zoom calls sometimes and demand to be seen and recognized by their parents for a moment. And we're getting this window into each other's personal lives.
Certainly in Western culture, we've really been trained to separate our personal life from our professional life. And this has sort of broken down that barrier. And maybe it's an opportunity to start saying, people are whole people, and people's lives are whole lives.
All right, very good. And so that I was asked to come up with a couple of questions. One question that I have, and this may be just based on my own experience of producing shows, storytelling, but also some of the debates about, let's say, museum and struggles. So you talk about this Hellenic tradition of the suffering, the focus on the resilience. And I know that we can't really talk about resilience without talking about the trauma and the violence and the suffering. And in your work, my question is, how do you balance presenting stories about trauma, suffering, or violence with stories of resilience? How do you tackle that, navigate that tension between these two? Either one of you can kind of answer that question. That would be great.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts if Cairo doesn't mind me jumping in first.
Go ahead.
I think that as Greek people, people not only people who are citizens of the Hellenic Republic, but members of the Greek diaspora, we actually have a really rich cultural vocabulary for talking about suffering. We have that from the ancient tragic tradition, and we have it from the Orthodox Christian tradition, which, if I can say so, has a much more robust theology of suffering than developed in the Western Church. And so from ancient times, from pre-Christian times with tragedy, and then in through the Byzantine and Ottoman periods and into the modern Greek consciousness, there is this incredibly robust and healthy way of talking about suffering that normalizes suffering as part of the human experience. So I was never taught in my church, for example, the way I think many Western Christians are taught, that a good life is a reward for virtue, or that suffering is a punishment for vice. In fact, I was taught that, and I think this is problematic in its own way, but I think it speaks to how Greeks view suffering as a group. I was taught we suffer so that we might be saved. I was taught that suffering is a way in which you connect to your deepest spiritual potential. And for me, when you tell stories of resilience, and you also tell stories then of suffering and trauma, what you're really telling is the story of how deeply people can be transformed by the most painful moments possible.
Very good. Thank you so much. I would like, Carol, do you have a few words to say? And then I would like to quickly move on. A minute if possible.
I'll talk a little more specifically about maybe how Katie and I kind of manage it in our work. I'm not Greek American, so I don't have the same experience of the cultural heritage of it, but Katie and I do talk about it a lot. I think for me, it comes down to being, in terms of how do you walk that line, as you asked about, like, how you deal with that. For me, it's about being really intentional about what the point is. Like, why are we talking about it? Why are we telling that story in that moment? And to me, usually the hope is that it'll breed empathy in some way. I think that's something that we can get, as odd as it sounds, but like in sharing suffering, you learn about each other, and hopefully you can come to connect a little bit. So we don't share stories of difficulty for the sake of doing it necessarily. I think when we talk about it, it's for the hope of connection, of empathy, and also the hope of growth has been, I think, a big thing for us, of hoping to maybe grow the perspective of the people that we hope to reach with the stuff that we do, presenting something in a way that they haven't thought about it before. And I also think Katie and I, and also Jeremy, who you're going to hear from later, but is also one of works at NHM with us and we love dearly. I think we try really hard to broaden the perspectives on narratives that have been told the same way for a long time, I guess, like taking a narrative that the community has told in a particular way for a long time and kind of add something to it, which is not to say that the old way is wrong, but just that it's maybe a little more complex than we thought. And that's not bad. That's actually kind of amazing in some ways. So I think it's about what's the point, right? It's like, don't tell the story if you don't know why you're telling it, I guess, has kind of been my guiding principle in all of this.
Very good, very good. Thank you so much. It's really important for us to really think about what story for, right? To generate understanding, sympathy, empathy, compassion, and possibly toward change. I'm going to introduce the second set of the interview. Tatsu Aoki, my apology if I didn't pronounce the name correctly, is a founder and the artistic director of Asian Improv Arts Midwest. And Michael Takada, we have worked together a lot. Mike is the CEO at the Japanese American Service Committee. And in this core virtual StoryCorps virtual conversation, they talk about the challenges of moving performing arts online, the importance of recognizing Asian American art in the Chicago history, and the generational differences in how people have dealt with the pandemic. And the story was facilitated by Rocio Santos and edited by Susanna Kemp. Go ahead.
What is sort of the biggest change you have seen in the last 7 months for Asian improv arts and all that you do?
I think the performing in front of audience is really a large part of our living, monetary and also spiritually. If you're a performing artist, I think your job is actually to show the integrity of your art in front of the people. And that kind of changed into telematic communication, i.e., Zoom, Skype, or the online. I think that's a huge change of not being able to go out in front of people. We kind of lost a big portion of the humanity. The good part is that we all learned so much about what we can do online. In some discovery has taken place in my industry. I think one of the biggest things that we had on this pandemic, along with the racial justice movement, is that we finally got a rather big grant from the city of Chicago to make our historical archive.
You and I, growing up in the same generation, we've been talking as youngsters back in the 70s about the Asian American diaspora, right? And I lost count on how many times I had to explain that to anybody. But, we can't ignore the Asian Americans. They're not like less lacking in need or less needing a platform.
Ideally, we don't have to talk about all these races. We don't have to talk about all this stuff. But I also strongly believe we are who we are, and we have this Japanese legacy that's part of our history, and it should be written into the Chicago history. The Buddhist temple taiko activities, Buddhist temple shamisen activities, Buddhist temple dance activities, none of these stuff is in the Chicago performing arts history.
I think what the pandemic has done for groups like yours, it has really demonstrated to the world, if you look around and stop and see things, you'll find such wonderful gems and jewels. I know that you instruct the next generations of artists in those various activities. How do you inspire them when such an important component of the art is ripped away from you?
I think my generation and older got hit harder with this. Using the Zoom and the Skype and Google Meet to do the instruction online like this, they were much faster to pick it up than I was. I think I understand the younger people better now. I teach at the Art Institute. I began understanding how they register to this telematic communication. And that was a good learning for me. And it really changed me to apply myself to, what they're doing now, rather than, you have to do it this way or that way. But I kind of like, okay, that you guys are going to do it that way. And let me join you to go together with this.
The pandemic has really taught me to continue to keep my eyes wide open, because you just never know what the next moment will have in store for you, or what's on the other side of that door that is appearing to be closed.
I think that says all, that we became flexible.
All right, thank you so much. So the question that I have for either one of you, I can invite either one of you to answer, and particularly for Tatsu, what's your words through share? Would you share the words of wisdom, advice, for, let's say, emerging artists, particularly for Asian American artists? How do artists build their resilience so they can preserve and maintain their artistic integrity in response to the various crises that we're facing right now? And
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we can encourage all these people is to try to actually put them on the scene. And I think during the conversation with Mike and I always talked about this, is that how do we put this artistic endeavor that's kind of buried in the community and not a part of the art history? How do we put this out to the part of the art history? And one of the things that I am always doing is try to get them to have a very much of a visible, noticeable platform so they can go out and do it. And I've done this with many different artists and younger generation. And we just have to kind of be strong about, be pushy about how important we are. We have to let them know how valuable our culture is. And I feel that all these years that we haven't really said enough, and there, we have a lot more to do.
absolutely. Mike, would you like to say a few words in response to that, or
Yeah,
it can be, please do.
Absolutely. So I just want to kind of dovetail with what Tatsu was just saying. You know, for me as a leader of the social service agency and community center, I basically am and have been encouraging my people to lean into this moment, right? Because as was mentioned earlier, in terms of, you know, we're navigating all this new technology, and, you know, mistakes and kids and animals and all sorts of things happen. But you know what? If there's ever, I keep saying, if there's ever a time to fail, fail now, because you know what? Everybody is learning at the same moment. And so I think the same thing applies in the arts as well, in terms of encouraging young people. Don't be hesitant. Don't, you know, just go for it, because look, everybody else is pretty much in the same boat trying to figure things out. And so I think it works sort of in all settings.
Very good. And one of the ways that we build individual and collective resilience is really through sharing stories, right? Mm-hmm. What we're doing right now, or the shows that we produce, bring to the community through the virtual events. Resilience, right? Stories constitute part of the resilience, right? So thank you very much for the two of you. How's everyone doing? Can I get a sort of thumbs up and see how people just want to check in? The temperature in the room, just want to make sure everyone is okay. Good. Give me a thumbs up so I know. Very good. I love that. So very good. So the next interview, Andrew Leith is the Conservation and Collections Program Manager at the Chicago Cultural Alliance, and Jeremy Booker, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is the Collections Manager at the National Hellenic Museum. They have been working together since 2018 and navigating the move on to the online work since their institution went virtual in March. And in the StoryCorps virtual conversation, they talk about how the pandemic pushed the National Hellenic Museum to digitize its collections, and the increased access moving the exhibits online has provided. And the story was facilitated by Amy Tardif and edited by Susanna Kemp. Please show the video.
Close to 20 years ago now, I was volunteering at the Field Museum, and someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, there's this Cultural Connections program." So I checked this program out, and I had an opportunity to travel to all of these different parts of the city, including the National Hellenic Museum, the Balzikis Museum of Lithuanian Culture, the National Indo-American Museum, all these different corners of the city, and sit down over food with folks who are interested in exploring their own culture and other people's culture. So often I think back between now, being 38 and having been at the Alliance for 3+ years, to when I was 21 or 22 and in that Cultural Connections program, and how much it meant to me to be this young kid that was interested but felt like I was teetering between like an outsider looking in, to being in the experience where I felt like I was part of a community and part of a family, whether we had the same cultural background or not.
Oh yeah, definitely. And being 22 and being exposed to all these different peoples and cultures while working in this field, that's exactly what my experience has been. I started here at the National Hellenic Museum as an intern while I was earning my master's degree at Loyola University Chicago, and just sort of kind of fell into collections work. What I wonder about this time is, how has that adjustment been for you?
It's been tough. I feel isolated because my favorite part of my work is the social component, but I feel fortunate that all of these new technologies are developing in rapid succession in response to this need.
I recently had someone reach out from Thessaloniki in Greece doing a project about shadow puppet theater. She reached out about a specific collection that we had just put online. So with digitizing our collections and archives, we've been able to reach more people. It's something that as our communities wanted for a really long time, but we just didn't know how to do it. I mean, the infrastructure was there, but actually implementing it was kind of the thing that was holding us back. March of this year, we didn't have a choice anymore. And so that's we moved into that direction. Because our biggest issue here is that Greeks aren't by and large living in Greektown. They're so removed from the physical institution. And so by creating this digital exhibit and doing these other digital initiatives, we've been able to reach back out to people who have kind of drifted a little bit further away for just natural reasons, and then also expand to a greater audience. I think that's something that can be beneficial for a lot of institutions.
You know, really the larger story is the story of access and democratizing our ability as a community to engage with that content.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just this weird irony, because museums have always occupied this strange space where things are locked up behind the walls and we are the arbiters of what can be seen. And now at a time when people are really restricted from coming to the museums, they're getting more access than they've ever had before to the collection.
Because COVID has pushed us to reevaluate all that we've been digitizing, and think in terms of how do we share our stories with a broader audience? And that so often involves sharing our stories in a manner that is free. It really does mean that there's a much, much, much broader audience that is going to partake.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Jeremy. So I want to kind of link this conversation to the first conversation that we had when Carol and Katie talked about putting on the Black Lives Matter might create tension in the Greek community. And this is my question, and I know there has been a lot of debate in terms of it. Think about it, that we are not just facing a crisis in terms of the pandemic, but also the crisis of the uprising, right? Equity issue, social justice issue. And so I want to ask the two of you as administrators of museum and also Chicago Cultural Alliance, what's the role of the museum to respond to the social justice issue, to the issue of uprising, the racial equity issue, in order to stay relevant? And I would like to invite either one of you to answer that question.
Yeah, and that's a very good question. I think one of the main roles that we do at the National Hellenic Museum is capturing our oral histories. of our community, capturing stories that would have been lost, and before we had started collecting these stories had been lost. And that's a very important part of what museums do, because for whatever reason, some stories are just left out of the historical record, whether they're ignored, whether they're suppressed, and those stories are lost to history, and we'll never hear them again. And I think right now is just such an amazing time. I was actually recently looking at the biggest protests in American history, and we just lived through the biggest protest in American history, all of us here. And those are stories that are going to need to be preserved, and those are going to need to be saved, because there are a lot of people who don't want that story to be shared. There are a lot of people who would rather that story be forgotten, or some other aspect of what was happening be focused on, rather than this event, and the struggle that was actually being undertaken by people making sacrifices to their physical health in more ways than one, as we saw throughout the country. And so being that space to collect these stories and preserve them, but also, as we talked about in our interview, making them accessible, I think, is the most important aspect of that. We're working very hard to make our stories available online, and there are a lot of ways that can be done. Cairo, my colleague, has done some fantastic work putting stories and videos up onto YouTube. And so it's a very accessible platform to get those stories out there and to share with people. So even if you don't have an online collections management system like we do, you can still share stories regardless of your abilities or your financial resources.
Very good, thank you. Andrew, would you like to take 1 minute to answer that question?
It is absolutely incumbent upon museums to take a stand right now. I don't think that any of us can afford to be neutral. In fact, I think that being neutral is taking a stand perhaps in the wrong direction. I think we need to get back to the roots of why a museum collects, and we need to get back to the roots of whom museums are serving. The old idea is you collect objects to act as avatars for the communities that made them and used them. Those objects were supposed to help us to understand one another, help us to tell stories, and to be able to not only identify differences, but perhaps more importantly, identify commonalities. That's the whole crux of that Cultural Connections program that grew into Chicago Cultural Alliance. So we have to take a stand. And large museums that are not culturally specific need to take a stand by sharing the resources that they are privileged to have with smaller museums, with community-based museums, so those museums can maintain their collections and tell their own stories. And community-specific museums need to embrace the notion of first voice storytelling and need to be amplifying the stories of people in their community, the struggles and the accomplishments, so we can all, I think, unite together. That is something that museums are marvelously adept at doing, is getting us to reflect and getting us to notice not only those commonalities and differences, but perhaps the situations that arose that put us into the moment that we're in. And it should be a clarion call to action, moments like this, and museums can do that. So yeah, we're seeing that. We're seeing that at Chicago Cultural Alliance. We are so inspired to see so many of our members taking a stand, serving their communities, telling difficult stories, and that's why it's such a privilege to be here.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I really like the point. And throughout, we're going to connect everything together. Essentially, what you're pointing out really is that museum is not necessarily neutral, right? It's not just a cultural institution. It is, in fact, a political institution in some way. It highlights what stories are being told, what stories are not being told. And that comes to our next conversation, next interview, which is also very connected. And my apology first if I didn't pronounce the name correctly. Amita Banerjee is on the National Indo-American Museum's Board of Directors, and Anthony Herschel is a museum and art consultant who has worked with Amita and NEOM. And in this StoryCorps conversation, the two talked about NEOM's programming transitions during the pandemic and the museum's increased responsibility to connect its American Indian community during a difficult time. And the story was facilitated by Rocio Santos and edited by Susanna Camp. Go ahead and play the interview.
I thought we might just begin by talking a little about how your museum has been responding to this crisis.
We have always been a virtual museum, and being a digital museum, the responsibility of interfacing with our audience have always been very, very important and very strong. Now, with the pandemic, we have had to rethink all our programs. These have always been in person, where we meet and greet and do a lot of things together. Initially, we were thinking, how are we going to get through this and what are we going to do? We took advice from the art world's industry. We looked towards one particular museum called the Dank House, which is the German-American Museum in Chicago. They were doing some virtual cooking demonstrations. They were focusing on these chefs, these restaurants that were suffering from the pandemic. They were telling their story to the audience, and they were also doing a little cooking demonstration and teaching something to the audience. So we liked that idea, and we very quickly regrouped and turned towards the Indian American diaspora, the chefs and restaurant owners in the area. And they were really very eager to work with us and to share what they were going through with us. It's ironic what has happened. We've always dreamed of a brick and mortar space and having our own archives, our galleries, and our space for programs. But with the COVID, we've come back full circle.
There's so much available online. There's so many ways to be distracted. How do organizations like NEOM conquer new audiences?
The mission of the museum is to build bridges across generations and connect cultures through the colorful story of all Indian Americans. That's what we do. And we are sharing the commonalities of our culture, our heritage, and we are finding common ground. Now with a virtual platform, we can actually reach a national audience. And in some cases, we've had international audiences. We have one program, and the mission of the Gandhi Peace Program is to bring Gandhi's teachings of peace and nonviolence to public schools. When we were actually doing the program face-to-face with children, we were doing it at the Chicago public schools. Since we've become virtual, we have been able to do this program to any public school in America. That's a tremendous advantage, not to be curtailed geographically.
How do you feel that an organization like NEOM can respond to the unique circumstances of this period?
The smaller businesses, they have really been affected. And as an institution, we need to keep a stronger connection with them. And one way of doing it is to keep telling their stories. As a museum, that's what we do best. We ask them to participate in our programs where we can, and we keep raising awareness of their needs and their suffering. The other thing we can do is ask them to come on our programs. People are feeling more isolated. NEOM can kind of become that connective tissue. You know, it's like making a successful marriage work. It has to be resilient. You have to obviously stay in touch, and you have to work through the bad times in your life to make that marriage stronger. And I think we are doing it now. We're working through literally a bad marriage. I think we have a tremendously heightened role to play. And we need to be able to represent this community and be able to continue to tell all stories of Indian Americans.
All right, thank you so much. My question for either one of you, Anthony, Mita, and so I love this interview because you in some way talk about the Indian community and sort of point out that not all communities are homogenous, right? The Chinese community, there's such difference within the Chinese community, Indian community, such diversity differences. And my question is, how do you navigate, balance that tension between that presenting that shared identity, the Indian American community, also the differences within, and that differences can be in equity in terms of gender, class, race, sexuality. How do you navigate that tension between the shared commonalities, but also the differences within?
I'll just say that as a consultant working with NEOM, this was a question that I asked Ada right at the beginning about how to navigate in with all the tensions that exist across the subcontinent. And the answer I got was, we all share the experience of being here. And so, you know, that despite all the diversity of origin, of religion, of as you said, of class, that was an experience that they shared. And so, I mean, Amita can certainly talk about this at greater length than I can, but it was important to me to understand how that message was being delivered. How is there cohesion in such a large and varied group? And that was the answer I got. We all shared the experience of being here.
You know, I would have to say that diversity is in our DNA. Between the different languages Indian Americans speak, the different religions, the different diversity of festivals, cultures, celebrations, languages, we're quite used to that. But as Tony says, we ultimately experience the same experience when we come to this country and accept it as our own. So as an immigrant population, we more or less, I can't say we all feel the same way, and it's up to us to be able to represent everybody, you know. So we have to take extra care to make sure that the entire diaspora is being represented in a fair, you know, secular and many different ways, so that they don't feel disenfranchised.
Yeah, and I would just I would just add that if NEOM wasn't doing this among the various communities that all hail from India, ultimately, they would have no credibility in trying to reach out then to other groups from around the world. So I mean, it's got to be part of what they do and say every day.
And I like the metaphor of the marriage, right? You got to work through the differences in order to have a common ground. And it is difficult and challenging. I love that metaphor, absolutely. How's everyone doing so far? You're all good? I just want to check in with people. Give me a sign, thumbs up, so I know you're all doing well. I love this. Very good. We're going to continue to our next interview. Karen Abercrombie is the executive director of the Swedish American Museum, and Eva Nye is the self-employed artist and stay-at-home mom who used to teach Swedish language classes at the museum. Both moved from Sweden to the US in their early 20s. And in this StoryCorps conversation, the two talked about the museum's virtual language classes, living far away from their Swedish families, and their inspiration Eva takes from the outdoors. And the story was facilitated by Rocio Santos and edited by Susanna Kemp. Go ahead.
Was the museum closed? So we were closed from mid-March, and then mid-July, we were able to open the first and second floor. some of our local members come and just take a walk around the second floor because that's their way of connecting back to their heritage a little bit. And some of them just gets a lot of peace out of walking through. So have you been teaching Swedish online? Not me, but the teachers are. Oh, nice. And I started a practice Swedish group. So for all these adults that know a little bit of Swedish and wants to hear other people speak, we meet the people from St. Louis, from Utah, from Michigan, Minnesota, and they sort of have gotten to know each other because we have talked about our neighborhoods. We've talked about why we're in the US. And I don't think we would have ever started something like that if the pandemic and our need for figuring out different ways of connecting with people. Sometimes things fall in our lap that we hadn't really planned on. I mean, I feel so fortunate that I've been able to be part of this museum for the last 14 years and hopefully for a few more years, and connecting to so many people that have been going through some of the same things that I've gone through in being Swedish American, or are the second, third generation, and be able to learn what they have done in their life. So on that note, what are some of the things that you feel especially lucky about? My mom, the one thing that I'm so grateful for is that she's 78 and she's very active, you know, very typical Swedish lifestyle. I miss my sister, and a month ago I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that has been a part where I cannot involve my family in helping me or being part of taking care of my kids. So that's difficult because my sister is the most loyal person in my life. You know, she lives in Sweden and she has 2 children, and she would be here now if she could. You are an amazing, strong woman. Many of us are there with you as much as we can. You know, due to the pandemic, we can't be there physically. I have relatives to my grandpa, brothers that came over, that never had that opportunity to talk to, you know, their family the way we can talk to our family. So now I don't feel as lonely when there are difficult things like that, because at least I can pick up the phone or I can do a call and I can see the faces of my sisters and the strength of that. And in the early days, we've both been here since we were early 20s, and there was like $1 a minute to call home. And these are expensive tiers. I think I had like some phone bills that were like $300 or $400 a month. My grandpa's brothers didn't have any of that. It was the letters back and forth. How are you able to work as an artist during this time period? What gets your inspiration? Well, there are several things. I mean, in terms of pre-pandemic, one of my biggest things is traveling and experiencing different cultures. So a lot of my designs are not Swedish per se, even though I do design for the Swedish American Museum, but I am inspired by animals, and pretty much I want the art and the things that I make to have people feel good about wearing them. Personally, I have a t-shirt that you designed with animals sort of on my shoulder and butterflies. So does nature often come into what you do? Yeah, I do feel like there are messages around us that we might not necessarily be aware of, but if you quiet your mind and you go out in nature, and this is something I've done even more during the pandemic, I think that has really saved me from feeling more stressed than I could have, is to just be outside and watch a river or hear birds or see squirrels. They just kind of speak to my soul. For 7 months, I had no daycare. And so with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, that's quite difficult. I gave myself permission to take them out every day on bike rides. So a lot of my art turned into photography and writing, because I could still take photos when I was out with them. And, you know, using social media, I feel like I am a messenger. I want people to be able to find beauty every day, even whatever is going on in life.
So may I double check? I believe they're not here, correct? Is that correct? That neither...
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, neither are here today.
Okay, very good. So why don't I do this? I just open up this conversation for everyone to jump in, whether it is for the museum or community organization. One of the things that I was thinking about, is really the generational difference. Particularly museums or community organizations are talking about they have a difficult time connecting with, let's say, second generation, third generation, fourth generations, right? That there is that people become distance from the community itself. I want to invite people to kind of talk about how do you reach out to the younger generations in your work? What difficulties did you encounter? How did you tackle that? And it can be.
It's a lot of what Jeremy and I talk about, and Katie, but she unfortunately had to leave because she is in a very different time zone and needed to go to bed. But Jeremy and I talk about this a lot because we have had that experience at the National Hellenic Museum for sure, that a lot of our constituency are on the older side and we don't always connect with the younger generation of Greek Americans. And I think that's actually been a lot of our work on YouTube and things like that, because that is kind of a platform that I think some other people engage with. We've also recently launched a podcast. I think for us, it's about trying new things, I guess, just like looking down and Jeremy, feel free to add to this or contradict me or whatever you would like to do. But I think for us, it's looking at things we haven't tried. I think that's kind of the big thing. It's like, what's some stuff that we have never done? And try it, and maybe it doesn't work out, and that's fine, but maybe it does, or even if like 3 people think it's cool, like that's exciting, so it's about, I really liked what someone said earlier. It really resonated with me about the idea that like this is the time to make mistakes because we're all kind of like failing together, I guess, in this new moment. So trying stuff that we maybe wouldn't have in a different situation, because you can fall back on the comfortable of what we always do. What have we always done? We can't do that now. So it's an opportunity, I guess. It's all about, I try to look at it as an opportunity and not a roadblock, I suppose.
Very good. And I believe that comment was made by Mike. Mike, you kind of putting that question about how do people reach out to the older generation because of the technology, right? And I'm assuming you're kind of probably navigating both. How do you reach out to the older generation because of the technology differences, but also the younger generations because of, let's say, politics, or how do you navigate that tension? What are you struggling with?
So, we're trying to find ways to do more intergenerational type programming, right? Where, maybe we have some of our younger people actually working with elders, and, we haven't yet kind of launched this yet, but we're trying to think of some different types of programming like that. And that's why I kind of threw the question out there, because yes, I think we're all thrilled that geography no longer matters to a lot of what we're doing, right? It's just awesome to see somebody from Texas pop up on our screen, right? But there's this whole other crew of people, our grandparents and our parents, who are aging and just don't have the wherewithal to access. And so I know that we're thinking about all these things, right? And I was just looking for some ideas.
I think I second to Mike that one of the important things that we learned from my organization through working with everybody is this: younger generation brings the older generation together into this telematic communication. We produced over 30 programs online, taiko, dance, and contemporary music and everything. And we increased a lot of audience by having younger people engaged, and they bring their mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers. So now we have online presentation, and I know people's grandfather and grandmother are watching us with the cell phone because younger generation set them up. And this is a very, very interesting dynamics that we're seeing right now. And there are more future to like what Mike's organization is specifically talking about, is bringing in the younger people to be connected to older people, because older generations are not going to go into their computer to do this. It's a younger generation that's going to bring them into this diaspora. And Mike and I have a very similar idea about how to encourage this communication process.
Right. And I agree with you. So what what NEOM has done is that we've been a little sly. We've given some very key positions to the middle generation, programming head, etc., just so that they not only bring in their own generations and think about programming in a way that can straddle all the generations, they bring in their parents' generation, and their children can also participate. So we feel that in doing so, we are actually being able to take care of all three generations. And so far it's worked really well for us. And we hope to see more of, the same kind of programming in the future. Let's see.
Very good. And one thing I think is really important is to have cross-generational conversations, right? Sometimes people in different generations don't even have conversations, particularly difficult conversations, because for fear of passing on trauma. But here's the thing, particularly with my experience working with Cambodian Heritage Museum, the older generations don't want to share stories because they're afraid to pass on trauma. But here's the thing, is the trauma is going to be passed on regardless whether you share stories or not. And so it's really important to share. And this is now increasingly, I realize we got to preserve stories from older generations, right? So ask them about their experiences, ask them to share stories with you. Bring everybody into the room to have difficult conversations, right? That's how you build intimacy, build relationships. And so I want to encourage everyone to do that. Our next interview will be Madison Hill, Sammy Joe Johnson, and Joshua Morgan, are 320 young ones, 320-something actors and multidisciplinary artists currently working from the same home. And in the StoryCorps virtual conversation, recorded in the 2 home studios they have made in the former living room and closet, they discussed resilience and personal discoveries inspired by the wrench that the pandemic threw in their early career path. And this story was facilitated and edited by Mary Beth Sear. Go ahead and play the interview.
We are all primarily theater artists living in one moderately sized apartment. And we are all working from home, which is kind of strange. And we also haven't been living together all that long, just a few months.
Yeah, Josh, you've been living here the longest, I think, right?
I've had different roommates, and this is my first group of actors living together in this apartment, which has been really awesome because we morphed this studio in our living room, and the studio I'm in is in a closet. It's for voiceover work. So we've really utilized what we have at home to further our careers since we all have a similar goal.
One of us will be like, okay, I'm doing a self-tape now. Can you come help? Is my lighting good? Can I borrow your ring light and all of that business?
It's been really nice to have 2 artists to remind each other that we're all still sticking at it, because it has been kind of difficult when we're all shut out of physical theaters for almost a year now.
How have you become resilient, or in what ways have you experienced resilience during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what does resilience mean to you now?
A few weeks back, we were talking about how we felt this opportunity to slow down and take a breath, specifically when it comes to having a career, that there's always this pressure to be always working on a project and always doing something, and this pressure to be feeling like you're constantly leveling up. And there's so much less pressure to do it now, get it done now, achieve, and just breathe into it and be like, this is a journey for the long run. And the resilience to keep at it for the long run. I think patience and resilience are good friends.
I found different ways to express creativity during this pandemic, like taking piano lessons with my sweet grandma, which has been wonderful. And I've now suddenly realized, oh, music is something that I could incorporate into my career. Finding those different outlets that I like, that I'm not just one type of artist. And I don't know if I would have discovered that so young. if this pandemic hadn't happened necessarily.
That's something I found for myself when I think of resilience through this time is expanding my artistic career to have multiple hats so that I can do film work, which I started over the pandemic, and voiceover work, which I started over the pandemic, and my art work and my acting work in theater. And it is a lot of different things. And I've really discovered that through this time is that I have the potential and the possibility to do all of those different things. And I enjoy all of those different things.
Yeah. And I think this pandemic has proved that you can be an artist anywhere, even just sitting at home. Art is resilient.
All right, very good. Yesterday in my show, I said something along the line. You don't need to be an artist to move people, right? Everyone, and I could respond to the sentiment that everyone can be an artist. Being an artist myself, the resilience of artists, that's a given. I have no doubt. Artists are the most resilient group of people I have ever seen. But here's the thing, we know the future of theater, right? The performance venues may not even exist, right? That theater, its existence is in question. So this is really the difficult part, is how do you demand that your art should be paid and your art needs to be valued at a time when other things, meaning survival of the theater, survival of the company, the survival of the space, seem to be deemed as more important than your art? Go ahead, any one of you.
That is an excellent question and a tough one for sure, because absolutely it's tough to find silver linings in such a tragic moment. But it is my great hope that, you know, whether it's a year or a year and a half down the line, when we are able to commune in the same room and be experiencing live voices reverberating in the same room, that people, the public, will be so much more in touch with how meaningful that experience is.
I also think that a lot of people have turned to art in this time to get through this pandemic. And I think that just sings to how important art is. I mean, just talking to friends and being like, yeah, I was just watching Netflix so much at the beginning of the pandemic. And that's like, well, that's what I do. That's what I hope to do one day. That's me. And how important I think everyone is discovering entertainment and storytelling and connection and community is. And that's what art is too.
So yeah, to second to that, I'm sorry,
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that the template of the foundation of supporting art changed drastically to the older generation, to the new generation, is one of the big things that people lost being interested in people. They're more interested in formula of the art or the product itself of what the artist creates, but they forgot to be interested in people. And this is very, very true in the arts education. You know, like when you teach the art class, you see the drastic change from the people in the 80s and 90s to now, that they're more interested in information, more interested in data. They're more interested, they kind of forgot this being in touch with the people. So that's why I think the legacy project of any kind, to talk about the history, talk about the people, talk about the oral history, is so important, because then we can get these people back to be interested in other people. Then if you are interested in other people, it's not hard for you to give your money to these people, not really the other thing. So I believe to present all these arts all the time so that people are interested in our people, my artists, you know, in my organization, rather than what we do. What we do is what we do, but I want them to be interested in how they do it, how they live, what they do to live. Then the money can be generated. But that's only my hope. So I could be wrong about this.
Very good. Joshua, go ahead, Joshua.
I think one thing that will happen once this pandemic is over is that during this pandemic, a lot of us are isolated, we're alone, we're with few people. And one thing that's very glorious about theater is that you experience that art with other people. That community aspect, that audience aspect is so specific to theater. And so I know that once we are able to commune again in a theater, whether it is a physical space that is a play, or if it's a park, or if there's some sort of way, but theater will survive. We will come back and we will be able to experience art together as a community.
I have a question. Have either any one of you been asked to do something for free? Because
yes,
yes, that's what I was hitting at.
That's our
Please
tradition.
elaborate.
That's
Elaborate.
a long tradition of performing artists. Like we have a heavy music presentation. People always ask you to do something for free, and you should kind of say like yes and no all the time.
And what I want to point out is that during this pandemic, it is already so difficult for artists to survive, right? But yet artists are continue to be asked to do something for free, right? And so that really raises an important question for me. Then how exactly are we supporting art, right? So thank you very much. Thank you. So the conclusion is don't do anything for free, right? But that's also difficult. Thank you, everybody. Now, let me turn to the last interview. Jason Matsumoto is with the Hoetsu Taiko Drumming Ensemble in Chicago. He speaks with his friend Mary Doi in this StoryCorps virtual conversation about how he has adapted the Japanese performance group in 2020 to COVID-19 and to pay tribute to Black Lives Matter by performing for inmates outside of the Cook County Jail. And this story was facilitated and edited by Amy Tardif. Please show this interview.
I was introduced to playing taiko very early, and my parents played, this is a story that centers around the Midwest Buddhist Temple in Chicago's Old Town. The very first taiko group in the Midwest was formed there in the 70s, and my parents were part of that. And so taiko comes from a very particular tradition of Japanese music. The actual instrument can be traced back even further into like Asian culture.
I went on the Hoetsu website and I find the Black Lives Matter Hoetsu equity statement. And I applaud the Hoetsu group for it and wondered, had you been thinking this way, say, before the pandemic, before the Black Lives Matter, I'll call it a movement, really took off?
Taiko is a huge kind of big performance. There's a lot of people on stage. There's a lot of movement. There's coordination across players. I would describe it as like this like unique combination of movement, power, and grace, right? And then like on top of that, music. It's very difficult to find places to practice that in and during a pandemic. And so we knew that it was super important for us to stay connected. So we have been meeting twice a week at our normal practice times since the pandemic began. And we sat down and we were like, well, what can we do now? Like we can sit around in our houses and we can work on technical drumming skills, which I think some of us have been doing. But, how often do you get like a year to think deeply about who you are and what your values are? And so as we had those conversations, we were like, well, we see what's going on in the world. And we know as Hoetsu Taiko, we have a voice and we have fans and we have an audience and we can be part of the conversation starter around this. Mary, the last time I saw you in person was at the Cook County Jail. Like it's a radical thing to play Japanese music out loud in the streets on drums with like a multi-ethnic group behind you, like a cohort of people who are just getting along and playing music. And I think that's like a modeling the behavior, right?
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about why Cook County Jail? What is going on there?
Cassandra Greer, a woman whose partner was put into the Cook County Jail, I believe early on during the pandemic, and he died in jail. She has committed her time and her energy, her resources to bring people together. I think every Sunday they're actually there even more often, but it's directly about the inequities that we're seeing play out. And this one in particular is about the overpopulation of Black men in jail, and then the kind of compounding impact of the threat of COVID-19 in a crowded population, and how that just makes no sense.
Can you describe a little bit about what you've done when you've participated at the jail?
They're just showing them that people are out there to support them, that people are out there that love them, sending whatever they can do, literally through the barbed wire, through the window, to people who are standing up there waving at us, you know? Taiko is a very loud thing, so we got to perform in front of that.
It's quite a powerful ritual. As an audience member, I do miss it, because part of what happens, especially when you're in an auditorium and hearing taiko, is that you feel it in your heart. I mean, literally, the vibrations are physical, you know. But one thing that I did see was your little kitchen ensemble taiko piece on your website. Have you done any more things like that? Because I know that you don't all have taiko drums in your house. Do you do like Zoom practices where somebody's hitting that scope bottle and somebody's hitting, you know, a pan?
It almost does taiko a disservice to only listen to it without seeing it, or to even watch it on a small screen. You just, the vibration, the power of the drums, you know, like the music doesn't come through that well. So there's a track playing, and then all of us are playing the rhythms on pillows, Brita water filters, scope bottles, stuffed animals. Like, it's just like this hilarious looking, we call it the kitchen quarantine version. But it's been a lot of creativity around how to practice, you know.
I think that just shows some of the inventiveness of artists these days.
Resilience to me as an artist right now looks like self-care, and thinking about how do you set yourself up so that, you know, when things become a little bit easier, you know, you still have the energy to create.
All right, thank you so much. And I'm going to have this question. I'm going to connect that to the previous conversation about a museum, you know, take a stand for a social justice issue. And this question is for Jason, but for either one of you. Jason, why is it important for you as an Asian American artist or Japanese American artist to use your art in solidarity with Black Lives Matter? Right? Why is it important for you?
Thanks, Ada. You know, I think when you look back, so the Japanese American history, and you know, if you are unfamiliar, there's kind of a long history right after World War II, during World War II, of the incarceration of about 120,000 Japanese Americans, primarily based on, you know, the decisions based on race. It was like during wartime. And I think when you think about that moment, one thing that our community talks about a lot is, you know, the solidarity of who was standing up for us in that moment. And there weren't that many people that lent a voice, you know, to the oppression that was faced by Japanese Americans who were put in concentration camps during World War II. That, I think, is of particular importance as we look at like what's happening to with the Japanese American community, and them understanding their own history and understanding why it's so important to be in solidarity, using your voice, using your privilege, using whatever you can to help people who might not be connected to the issues understand the issues, keep those issues kind of like front and center in their mind. So I think it's, you know, I think it's that. And then I would say that like the only way we're going to move forward, like if you all saw the election map, right? Like the only way we're going to move forward is to figure out how to have conversations with each other and work on building multi-ethnic, multi-class solidarity movements.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mary, would you like to use 1 minute to answer that question?
I'm going to use my minute to say that I'm not a performer. I'm not a museum person. And so my way of participating is to kind of lift up people like adjacent, lift up the next generation of artists and activists. And I saw that going on in my community this summer, whether it was the Sue for Solidarity protest march that got canceled. We had anticipated about 1,000 people. We had to pivot to online. They had about 15,000 viewers. So that was really impressive. And it was led by the younger generation. My generation just doesn't have the know-how. And maybe we don't even have the social networks that the younger people do, but they put on an amazing program, followed up by a 9-week program by another group that usually leads pilgrimages to the camps. So the pilgrimages usually happen in the summer. And this group of people decided that over 9 weeks, they were going to have programs every single day of the week. So they curated about 200 programs. They didn't do just one a day, but they did about 200 in that 9-week period. What I see the younger people doing is making sure that people like me know how to get on Zoom. So there'll be practice sessions to, instructions and practice sessions if I feel uncomfortable with the technology. So I think for our community, what I've seen is a generational shift in leadership. And it's not just come out of COVID, but it's come out of COVID and the already existing organizations within our community. And I'm just really proud of the younger generation.
Very good. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, can you believe it? We are done with all the interviews. Does it feel like a class to you? So this is what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to have you unmute yourself, or if you don't feel comfortable, you can simply chat. I'm going to have you share one word. How are you feeling right now after this conversation? You're free to yell out.
Connected.
Inspired.
Inspired.
Inspired. Keep going.
Invigorated.
Invigorated. Keep going.
Hopeful.
Hopeful. Love it. Love it. Keep going. Appreciative. Very good. Keep going.
Grateful.
Good. Energized. Thankful. Very good. Keep going.
Connected.
Connected. Fantastic. Very hopeful. Very good. Keep going. One more word and I'll dismiss the class.
Community.
Community. Does it feel like a community now?
It does.
Very good. Does it feel like we're all connected, like we are part of a community, we're at home? And this is what sharing stories is all about. So thank you so much for everyone. You're wonderful. And I appreciate you. Proud change agents. Everyone here is a change agent. So do something, do something, do something. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Alicia.
Yes.
Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in for just a second, Alicia.
Of course.
I just want to thank you all so much for sticking with us. Thank you, Ada. This has been amazing. And I want to say one more time to everybody, if you were all inspired, invigorated, excited by this moment, and this has led you to explore the Chicago Cultural Alliance for the first time or for the 100,000th time, if you are inspired to give, we welcome any contributions you feel comfortable with. So please consider us. You can text to give or check out our website. Thank you. Alicia, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you everyone for sticking around. And I just wanted to close this wonderful event by thanking Illinois Humanities for their generous funding, StoryCorps for making our vision of an archive possible, and for our wonderful steering committee for guiding this vision of an archive. And of course, a big thank you to Dr. Ada Cheng, our wonderful moderator, all of our participants, and everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much, everyone. And I would just like to welcome everyone to continue adding stories of resilience related to COVID-19 or to any other challenges your community has faced to our archive. And our continued hope is that folks will look to this unique archive to draw strength, inspiration, and connection to a community of like-minded professionals. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much for hosting this. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
All right. Hey,
good job, team.
Thank you all again. Great job,
Thank
Alicia.
you.
Great
Thank
job,
you.
Kelsey. Great job, Teresita. I really appreciate all of your hard work.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you. This went really well.